Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Olson, the archivist at the Frances Willard House Museum and WCTU Archives in Evanston. And welcome to Let the Records Speak, uncovering the stories of Black women in the WCTU, which describes our current digital project in progress.
And I'm Kristin Jacobsen, Assistant Archivist. This presentation that we're here to talk about comes out of what we call the pandemic pause. What you see here in my background and on the screen is an exterior of the Frances Willard House Museum, which we didn't see a lot of last year, as I'm sure you didn't see a lot of your workplaces. Many of you also found, like we did probably, that the break in routine gave you a new perspective. We've especially found it helpful to focus on our core purpose as archivists, which is really making information available. So because no one could get into the archives, it inspired us to increase our digital archives so researchers could at least get to part of our collection. The project we're most proud of creating or building on during this time is this comprehensive research database that Janet mentioned that explores the significant but largely unknown role of Black women in the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Today, Janet and I will have a conversation about this project and about its next steps. So Janet, in hindsight, bringing to light the stories of Black women in the WCTU seems very logical, seems very like a much needed addition to research. But we always know when you're in the middle of the thick of things, when you're in the middle of your working life, you don't always think of some kinds of things that seem obvious later. So how did this idea come about?
Well, this project stems from a veritable confluence of recent events. Our need to offer more online resources, thank you, COVID. Our work supplying information during the suffrage anniversary, which relied so heavily on the stories of local, lesser-known women, the kind of information our records are full of, and the growth of digital humanities research, combined with recognition that little scholarly research has been done on the lives and work of the many Black WCTU members, our knowledge that their stories exist in our records waiting to be uncovered. And perhaps most important, this new project stems from the interest generated by our existing virtual exhibit, Truth Telling, about the conflict between Frances Willard and Ida B. Wells.
That really is a lot of confluence of influences. We've got COVID, we've got the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, digital humanities, and interest in telling unknown stories. Each of these on their own didn't trigger this new project, but together they were a really strong impetus. I'm sure people are familiar with a lot of these influences, especially COVID, but they may not have heard of Truth Telling, the project. What you see on the screen is the homepage for the Truth Telling site. Why don't you go ahead and describe the project, Janet?
Okay, this is an online exhibit, and you can see the URL is it down at the bottom of the screen in orange. That was launched by the Frances Willard House Museum and Archives in 2019 about the controversy that took place in 1894 to 95 that was highly publicized in newspapers in the US and England when Frances Willard and the WCTU failed to endorse Ida B. Wells' anti-lynching campaign, and Wells accused Willard of racism. This is a well-known and significant event. And the Frances Willard House Museum has been working for a long time on how to incorporate this story into the interpretation of the House Museum, the interpretation of Willard's life, and the history of the WCTU.
The process was a challenging one, wasn't it? We spent quite a while laying the background for it, for how to be both sensitive and transparent in interpreting what was a fairly complex subject. So what were the goals for Truth Telling that came out of all of this thinking and discussion?
Well, the goal was to use the Willard House Museum and WCTU Archives historical resources, along with other sources, to uncover and explain the full story about the conflict between Willard and Wells and to honestly examine Willard's failure of leadership on this issue. We wanted to make the materials that we found accessible to our community in Evanston and in the wider world so that people could explore the story for themselves.
So here is another slide from the Truth-Telling Project. What you see here is the timeline portion of truth-telling, just so you get some idea of how extensive this project is. It wasn't just an account of the events, although that would be important in itself, but it's a little bit broader and a little bit more in depth. And this came from proceeding very deliberately and intentionally to closely examine the story to be as honest as possible about events. So how did truth-telling as a project develop after that initial groundwork was laid?
Well, it started in 2017 with a team of Loyola University Chicago public history graduate students who began researching the Willard-Wells debate for a class project, using, among other sources, the Willard archives, especially the scrapbooks of newspaper clippings that covered the debate. One student continued the research after the project ended, the semester-long project ended, and we got support from Loyola and Northwestern to turn her research into a web exhibit using Scalar, an online publishing platform. The site includes a slew of archival documents and images, along with timelines and collateral material, including an essay by Wells' great-granddaughter. It was launched on March 8th, 2019 on our website and with a public presentation at Northwestern.
So truth-telling has been around for more than a year. We've been able to gauge the reaction to it and to see how researchers have been using it. What happened after the launch first and then during the pandemic?
Well, we publicized this site very heavily and got good responses from people, including distance researchers who found the site useful. Then, once schools and colleges went online in 2020 during the pandemic, we started hearing from teachers and professors who were using truth-telling in their classes. The digital exhibit is also on permanent loan to the Special Collections Center of the Nashville Public Library's exhibit on women's history. And as we discussed earlier, that's when we started thinking about what we could do next. Research on the Willard-Wells debate helped remind us that the story most people know about the WCTU does not include the extensive activism and the participation of Black women in the organization, including in national roles, starting in the 1880s, long before the Willard-Wells confrontation.
Only some of the Black WCTU members were well known, and that was because of their work outside of the WCTU. From left to right on the screen here, you can see some of these well-known members: Amanda Berry Smith, Lucy Thurman, and Frances E.W. Harper. You can also see on the screen some of the Black WCTU members who were less well known: Sarah Early and Rosetta Lawson.
We researched we realized that the WCTU story was an important contextual piece for understanding the Willard-Wells story. There have been so many Black women in the WCTU. Many towns had Black WCTU unions. They were segregated from the white unions, but they had the same structure and goals. And they sent delegates to the national WCTU annual meetings, and the women held leadership roles at national and local levels. As a result of the research for truth-telling, we realized how much information about Black WCTU women exists in our records. In short, this seemed like a good opportunity to expand on truth-telling, to explore more fully the lesser-known story of African-American women in the WCTU.
So we realized that this story of Black women in the WCTU was a truly untold story, and that truth-telling was only one aspect of it. We also realized that we had this wealth of untapped resources. So how did the project develop from there? into the full-blown project of collecting names and chapters?
Well, since there are not many articles and monographs examining the work of African American women in the WCTU, we decided to create a database of Black WCTU women from our extensive holdings of national and state WCTU records in order to provide a resource for researchers, especially digital humanity types. Once again, the work started as a research project for a Loyola Public History grad student last winter and spring, once we could allow people back in the archives. Our intern diligently laid the groundwork for the project, setting up a spreadsheet and identifying the best resources in the archives for the information we were seeking. She also identified outside sources to use. But the pandemic and scheduling made it difficult to make much progress, and we realized the project was a lot bigger than we thought.
We really do owe a lot to those Loyola public history students. Janet and I are especially proud of them since we both have master's degrees from Loyola. So that graduate student finished her internship this past spring, but as you said, she wasn't able to complete the project. So what was the next step that we embarked on this summer?
We applied for a grant from Northwestern's Chicago Humanities Initiative program to fund a graduate student for the summer. A great opportunity for us. Thank you, Northwestern. The grad student started in July, and we sent her to combing through the basic major WCTU sources. And also we set a date limit on the initial research ending in about 1950. Since the WCTU has always been a decentralized organization, there are no comprehensive membership lists. So she started to establish a baseline list by searching through the national WCTU annual reports and annual handbooks, since these list officers at the national, state, and local levels, providing a plethora of names, roles, and locations, plus some background data. This all went into an Excel spreadsheet. Here's a screenshot showing the basic information we decided to collect, the different fields we set up, including, of course, most important, the sources. And there are a couple of other columns that we're collecting that are off the side that you can't see. It's pretty extensive, but fairly simple. So by the end of the summer, the intern had added over 500 names of individual women and had identified the locations of 30 local unions.
Just this information, what Black unions there were and the Black WCTU members will be extremely valuable for researchers. There are other ways we could have presented it, though. How did we decide on this format? Why not, say, an annotated bibliography or compilation of the documents?
Well, as archivists, our job is to make information available for researchers, but the WCTU isn't the most logical place to look for Black women's activism. And the stories of individual individual members and participation can be hard to extricate from the large volume of national and state WCTU records, most of which are not digitized, requiring on-site research. And of course, we can't know which specific issues and topics would be undertaken by our researchers, although many potential research questions have occurred to us in the course of this project. So we felt the best use of our time and skill was to create a database of individuals, names, locations of Black unions, dates, and various other background material, creating a resource for research and analysis. We anticipate that this database will be a very fruitful resource, especially in demographics and digital humanities, where researchers can organize, graph, map, and mine the data to find answers, patterns, networks, changes over time, etc. And you can see, I think you can see on the next slide, the another section. This is the Black unions that we collected. We started collecting as we were finding the names of women. So this is another aspect that will really add a lot to the future researchers' work. And we hope the whole project will add another facet to exploring the history of Black women in the WCTU. And we hope to see our questions and many more answered as this data gets used and incorporated in articles, dissertations, and monographs.
It will be very exciting to see what researchers do with the information and what kind of stories they will tell. Meanwhile, we'll continue adding to the resource as we find more information. This slide, for example, shows the other resources we want to mine for additional names and unions. Can you talk about the next steps we plan to take?
Yes, after we comb through the main WCTU records to create a skeleton database, we'll move to exploring the many outside sources that can round out the stories we have found. Meanwhile, there are still many additional resources in the archives that we can continue to plumb. But outside resources we plan to consult include the wealth of Black newspapers now digitized through Gage, Newsbank, Chronicling America, etc. These are a huge source for additional information on women we've already identified, as well as more whose names and work will be uncovered. I mean, just from a simple search of the term WCTU to start with. Also, there are biographical encyclopedias online and in print, such as Alexander Street's, they have a couple of really great appropriate databases. And there are a number of very good state level biographical databases. Not to mention digital projects such as the very cool Colored Conventions Project and the projects undertaken by the Digital Public Library of America. And there are always census records, Ancestry.com, etc. And most of these outside sources can be researched remotely. So we hope to entice researchers, interns, and volunteers from all over to help fill in the database in a sort of crowdsourcing manner to be determined as we go along.
Researchers will be really anxious to use this information once they hear about it. We'll want to know when the project will be available.
Well, when we get the database to a point where it has sufficient information to form a useful resource, we'll figure out how to get it online onto our website, along with biographic references and other helpful information. We could leave it as a simple spreadsheet, but we hope to get some technical help to make it more versatile and more usable. In whatever format, we want it to be very easily accessible and very searchable. And it will be an ongoing project that we keep adding to for the foreseeable future, and that we hope will continue to inspire researchers for even longer.
Well, all of us who have been involved in the project or even just watched it develop have also been excited and inspired to bring these remarkable women to light. Like truth-telling, this project on finding Black women and documenting Black women in the WCTU really has been a huge team effort. We've had wonderful interns and volunteers. We've had great support from outside institutions, and we've been able to devote lots of time to it. So here's our pitch to those of you watching today. We've received a lot of help so far, but we need more. Like many of you, we are a very small staff, and we could use technical help with getting the database up online, and we could use remote research help, as Janet mentioned about crowdsourcing the searching of non-WCTU resources.
So please email us if you would like to contribute your research skills or tech skills to this project on site or remotely. And if you know of professors and students who would benefit from a primary source research experience, perhaps as a class or group assignment, In addition, perhaps you can recommend this project to friends or retirees like me who enjoy doing research, untangling mysteries, and dabbling in primary sources. Thank you for letting us share our project and our enthusiasm. We welcome your feedback.